The blood on Beatrice Dalton's hands came from scraping them raw against the canyon wall, and her voice had gone hoarse from screaming into the empty Arizona sky when she heard the sound of hooves above her and went completely silent. She pressed herself against the rock face, 20 feet down from the rim where her horse had stumbled and sent her tumbling over the edge. Only a narrow ledge had saved her from plunging another 100 feet to the canyon floor below. The November sun beat down mercilessly even as the temperature dropped with the approaching evening, and she had been trapped here for 3 hours, watching vultures circle overhead with increasing interest. Her split riding skirt was torn, her blouse dusty and stained with sweat, and somewhere far above she could hear that horse snorting and pawing at the ground. Beatrice held her breath. Bandits roamed these canyons outside Gila Bend, and a woman alone was worth more than gold to the wrong kind of men. She had been foolish to ride out here alone, but her father's ranch was struggling, and she had heard rumors of water on the far side of these ridges. 3 years of drought had turned the land to dust, and desperation made people take risks they otherwise would not. The horse above her whinnied, and then she heard a man's voice, low and steady. "Easy now, easy." She could not make out more than that, but the tone was calm, measured. Not the rough shout of an outlaw. Still, she remained quiet, her heart hammering against her ribs. The ledge beneath her boots was perhaps 3 feet wide, and already twice she had felt the crumbling sandstone give way beneath her weight. One wrong move and she would fall. Someone down there. The voice carried over the edge now, clearer. Young, she thought, not much older than her own 22 years. "I saw the tracks. Your horse is up here, but the saddle is empty and there's blood on the leather." Beatrice closed her eyes. She could lie, could stay silent, could hope he moved on. But the sun was sinking fast and the temperature would drop 40 degrees once darkness fell. She had no water, no supplies, and no way to climb back up the sheer rock face. "I'm here," she called out, her voice cracking. "I'm stuck on a ledge." A pause, then the sound of boots hitting dirt as someone dismounted. A moment later, a face appeared over the rim, silhouetted against the bright sky. She could not make out his features with the sun behind him, but she saw the hat, the broad shoulders, the rope coiled in his hands. "How bad are you hurt?" he called down. "My hands are cut up and I think I twisted my ankle, but I can climb if you can get me a rope." "I've got rope. Can you see where I'm standing?" She squinted up at him. "Yes. I'm going to tie this off to my saddle horn. When I drop it down, you wrap it under your arms and hold on tight. I'll pull you up, but you need to use your feet against the wall to steady yourself. Can you do that?" "I think so." "Thinking is not good enough. Can you do it?" His voice was firm but not harsh, and something about the confidence in it steadied her nerves. "Yes, I can do it." "Good, give me a minute." He disappeared from view, and she heard him speaking to his horse again, that same calm tone. Then the rope came snaking down the canyon wall, uncoiling as it fell. It landed within arm's reach, and she grabbed it with shaking hands, wincing at the pain in her abraded palms. She wrapped it around her torso as he had instructed, knotting it beneath her arms the way her father had taught her when she was a girl learning to handle cattle. "Ready," he called. "Ready." The rope went taut immediately, and she felt herself being lifted. Her boots scrabbled against the rock face, sending small stones tumbling into the void below. She used her legs to push herself away from the wall as he had said, walking backwards up the canyon as he pulled. The rope bit into her ribs and her ankle throbbed with each step, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. 20 feet had never seemed so far. Then hands grabbed her wrists and pulled, strong and sure, and she tumbled over the rim onto solid ground. She lay there gasping, her cheek pressed against the sun-warmed dirt, relief flooding through her in waves. "Easy now," that voice said again, and she realized he was talking to her this time, not the horses. "You're safe. Just breathe." She pushed herself up to sitting and finally got a good look at her rescuer. He was kneeling beside her, and the first thing she noticed was his eyes, a startling blue-gray like storm clouds over the desert. He was young, as she had guessed, maybe 25 at most, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and there was a scar above his left eyebrow that gave him a roguish look despite the concern in his expression. "Thank you," she managed. "I thought I was going to die down there." "How long were you stuck?" 3 hours, maybe more. "My horse spooked at a rattlesnake and I went over the edge." He was already reaching for a canteen tied to his saddle, uncapping it and handing it to her. "Drink slow. Not too much at once or you'll be sick." The water was warm but tasted like heaven. She forced herself to take small sips as he examined her hands, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone with such calloused fingers. He had the hands of a working man, she noticed, scarred and weathered, but his movements were careful as he turned her palms to the light. "These need cleaning or they'll fester. I've got supplies back at my camp about an hour's ride from here. Can you ride?" "I think so. My ankle is tender, but I don't think it's broken." He nodded and stood, offering her his hand. She took it and let him pull her to her feet, testing her weight gingerly. Pain shot through her ankle, but it held. He kept his hand on her elbow, steadying her, until he was sure she would not collapse. "I'm Frank Iverson," he said. "I work a small spread about 10 miles west of Gila Bend." "Beatrice Dalton. My father owns the Double D Ranch east of town." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I've heard of it. Big operation." "It used to be." She looked around and spotted her mare grazing a few yards away, apparently unconcerned by the drama of the past few hours. "Before the drought." Frank walked over to the horse and gathered its reins, checking it over with practiced efficiency. "She looks sound. Whatever spooked her didn't do any damage except to your nerves." He led the mare over to Beatrice. "Think you can mount, or do you need help?" Her pride wanted to say she could manage, but her body had other ideas. "I might need a hand." He interlaced his fingers to make a step and boosted her into the saddle with an ease that suggested he was stronger than he looked. She settled into the familiar leather and gathered the reins, her hands protesting every movement. Frank swung onto his own horse, a rangy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and turned west. "Follow me. We'll take it slow." They rode in silence for a while, and Beatrice used the time to study him when she thought he was not looking. He sat his horse like a man born to the saddle, moving with the animal rather than against it. His clothes were worn but clean, his gear well maintained. He had a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle and a pistol on his hip, standard for anyone traveling alone in this country, but he did not have the look of a gunfighter. There was something steady about him, something solid. "What were you doing out here?" he asked after a while, not turning around. "Looking for water. There's supposed to be a spring in these hills." "The old Navarro spring, you know it. It dried up 2 summers ago." He glanced back at her and there was sympathy in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I know how tough things have been. How is your spread managing?" "I've only got about 100 head and a few horses. It's easier to keep a small operation going in hard times. I've been hauling water from the Gila River when I need to, though it's barely more than a trickle these days." He paused. "Your father has what, 2,000 head?" 1,500 now. We've sold off what we could and the rest are starving on land that can't support them anymore." She heard the bitterness in her own voice and tried to soften it. "I'm sorry. You saved my life and here I am complaining." "You're not complaining. You're worried." "That's different." The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature was dropping fast, and Beatrice was grateful for the jacket tied to her saddle. She pulled it on, wincing as the movement jarred her injured hands. Frank's camp came into view as they rounded a bend. It was simple but well organized. A small fire ring with stones arranged around it, bedroll laid out nearby, and his supplies tied up in a tree away from scavengers. He had chosen a spot with good sight lines and his back to a rock face, the instincts of someone who knew how to survive alone in rough country. He dismounted and came to help her down, his hand steady on her waist as she slid from the saddle. Her ankle nearly gave out when she hit the ground, and he caught her, one arm around her waist, the other gripping her elbow. "I've got you," he said quietly. They stood like that for a moment, closer than propriety would normally allow, and Beatrice felt her breath catch. This close, she could see the exact color of his eyes, could smell the clean scent of sage and leather that clung to his clothes. Heat that had nothing to do with the desert sun spread through her chest. He seemed to realize the impropriety at the same moment and stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let's get you sitting down." He guided her to a flat rock near the fire ring and helped her settle onto it, then set about building up the fire. Within minutes, he had flames crackling, casting warm light across the camp. From his saddlebags, he produced a small medical kit, a battered metal box that had seen plenty of use. "This might sting," he warned as he knelt in front of her with a cloth and a bottle of whiskey. "It can't hurt worse than scraping them on rock." He smiled slightly at that, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face. "Fair point." He poured whiskey over the cloth and took her right hand in his, turning it palm up in the firelight. The cuts were ugly, deep scratches filled with dirt and dried blood. He began cleaning them with careful, methodical strokes, and true to his word, it stung like hellfire. Beatrice bit her lip to keep from crying out, determined not to appear weak in front of this man who had already seen her at her most vulnerable. "You're tougher than you look," he observed, glancing up at her face. "I've had to be. Running a ranch, even when you're just the owner's daughter, it teaches you not to complain about every little pain. Your father doesn't have sons to help him. He did. 2 of them. My brother Thomas died of typhoid 6 years ago, and my brother John was killed in a riding accident 3 years back. It's just me and my father now, and he's not getting any younger." She watched Frank work on her other hand. "That's why I can't just sit around and wait for rain. We need water, or we'll lose everything." "And then what happens to you?" It was a blunt question, but she appreciated the directness. "I suppose I'd have to find a husband willing to take on a woman with nothing. Or I could try to find work as a teacher or a seamstress, though I'm not particularly skilled at either." She met his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to understand." He finished cleaning her hands and reached for bandages, wrapping them with the same careful attention. "My mother was widowed when I was 12. She tried to keep our farm going back in Missouri, but without my father, the bank eventually took it. She ended up working as a laundress until she died 5 years ago. I know what it's like to watch someone you love lose everything." "Is that why you came west?" "Partly. Also, because there was nothing left for me back there. I worked other people's land for years, saved every penny, and finally had enough to stake my own claim out here. It's not much, but it's mine. No bank can take it from me as long as I can make the operation work." There was a fierceness in his voice when he talked about his land, a determination that Beatrice recognized because she felt the same way about the Double D. They were both fighters, both people who refused to give up even when the odds seemed impossible. He finished bandaging her hands and sat back on his heels. "I've got beans and salt pork. Not fancy, but it's food. Right now, that sounds perfect." He cooked over the fire while she rested, and soon the smell of food filled the air. Her stomach growled loudly enough that Frank chuckled, and she felt herself blush. He handed her a tin plate and a fork, and they ate in companionable silence. The food was simple but good, seasoned well and cooked properly. She had expected a bachelor living alone to be hopeless in the kitchen, but Frank clearly knew what he was doing. "This is delicious," she said after her third bite. "My mother made sure I could take care of myself before I left home." She said any man who couldn't cook his own meals and mend his own clothes was only half a man. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. There was a note of sadness in his voice, old grief that had mellowed but never fully disappeared. "I think you would have liked her. She was practical, like you. Didn't waste time on things that didn't matter." They finished eating and Frank produced a battered coffee pot, filling it with water and grounds before setting it at the edge of the fire. While they waited for it to boil, Beatrice found herself studying him again in the firelight. He had a good face, she decided, strong and honest, the kind of face you could trust. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Why did you help me?" "You could have ridden past, pretended you didn't see the tracks." He looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Why wouldn't I help you?" "Because you don't know me. Because getting involved with other people's problems is a good way to create trouble for yourself. Because most people out here mind their own business." "Is that what you would have done? Ridden past someone who needed help?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm starting to think I might be an exception." "Then maybe we're both exceptions." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Simple as that. If everyone only thought about themselves, this country would be even harder to survive than it already is." She sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. The temperature had dropped significantly now that full dark had fallen, and she could see her breath misting in the air. Frank noticed her shiver and stood, retrieving a blanket from his bedroll. "Here," he said, draping it around her shoulders. "I should have thought of that sooner. You've already done more for me than I had any right to expect. I can't take your blanket too." "I've got another one. Don't argue." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, grateful for the extra layer. They sat in silence for a while, drinking their coffee and watching the fire. Above them, the stars were coming out in force, a glittering canopy that seemed close enough to touch. Beatrice had always loved the desert sky at night, the way the darkness made the stars shine brighter. "I should get you home tomorrow," Frank said eventually. "Your father will be worried. He's at a cattlemen's association meeting in Phoenix. He won't be back until the day after tomorrow. He doesn't even know I left." Frank's expression grew more serious. "You rode out here alone without telling anyone where you were going." "I left a note." "That's not the same thing." "I know it was foolish, but I didn't want him to talk me out of it. He would have said it was too dangerous, that I should stay home and let the men handle it." She met Frank's gaze defiantly. "I'm tired of sitting around being decorative. I want to help save our ranch." "Being decorative is the last thing I'd accuse you of." There was something warm in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "But there's a difference between being brave and being reckless. You could have died today. But I didn't, because you found me. And if I hadn't been riding through, if I had taken a different trail—" She did not have an answer for that because he was right. She had been reckless, and it could easily have cost her life. The realization settled over her like a weight, and suddenly she felt exhausted, every muscle in her body aching from the fall and the fear and the adrenaline crash. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You're right. It was stupid." His expression softened. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I just don't like thinking about what could have happened." The way he said it, with that note of genuine concern, made something warm bloom in her chest. She barely knew this man, but there was a connection between them, something that felt right in a way she could not quite explain. "Where will I sleep tonight?" she asked, suddenly aware that they were alone in the wilderness and she had given no thought to propriety. "You'll take my bedroll. I'll sleep on the other side of the fire." "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will. Your body has been through trauma today, and you need proper rest. I've slept on the ground plenty of times. One more night won't kill me." She wanted to argue but could see from his expression that it would be useless. Frank Iverson, she was learning, was a man who made up his mind and stuck to it. In different circumstances, that stubbornness might have annoyed her, but right now it just made her feel safe. He helped her to the bedroll, supporting her when her ankle protested. The blanket smelled like him, that same sage and leather scent, and she found it oddly comforting. He banked the fire and settled on the opposite side with his own blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his rifle within easy reach. "Frank," she said into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything. Get some sleep, Beatrice." She closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of coyotes. Despite the strangeness of her situation, she felt safe. More than safe, she realized. She felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Sleep came easily, and she did not dream. When Beatrice woke, the sun was already climbing the sky and Frank was crouched by the fire, cooking breakfast. She sat up slowly, testing her various injuries. Her hand still hurt, but the bandages were clean and dry, and her ankle felt better after a night of rest. The worst damage seemed to be to her pride. "Morning," Frank said without turning around. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell off a cliff, but better than I expected. I've got eggs. One of my hens is a reliable layer even in hard times." He served her breakfast on the same tin plate from last night, and she ate hungrily. The eggs were cooked perfectly, and he had even managed to find some wild onions to add flavor. As they ate, she found herself watching the easy way he moved around the camp, the quiet competence in everything he did. "We should head out soon," he said as he cleaned the plates with sand and a rag. "It's about 3 hours to the Double D from here. Your father might be home early." The mention of her father brought reality crashing back. She was alone with an unmarried man, had spent the night in his camp, and would be returning home in clothes that were torn and stained. The gossips in Gila Bend would have a field day if anyone found out. Frank seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll drop you at your property line. You can ride in alone, tell your father you stayed with a friend or something. No one needs to know you were with me. I'm not ashamed of being rescued by you. I know, but I also know how people talk, and I won't be the cause of damage to your reputation." His thoughtfulness touched her more than she wanted to admit. They broke camp efficiently, Frank moving with the practice of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Within 20 minutes they were mounted and riding east, the morning sun warm on their backs. The ride passed too quickly for Beatrice's liking. She found herself wishing it would take longer, wishing for more time to talk to this man who had appeared in her life so suddenly. They spoke of small things, the land, the weather, the small pleasures of desert life. But underneath, every word was something else, an awareness that hummed between them like a plucked string. When the boundaries of the Double D came into view, marked by fence posts and a weathered sign, Frank reined in his horse. "This is far enough," he said. Beatrice stopped beside him, suddenly reluctant to leave. "Will I see you again? Gila Bend is not that big. I'm sure our paths will cross." "I'd like that." She hesitated, then added, "Maybe you could come to dinner sometime. I know my father would want to thank you properly for saving my life." Something flickered in Frank's eyes, pleasure mixed with caution. "I'd like that too, but I'm not sure your father would approve of you spending time with a small rancher who barely keeps his head above water." "My father is a practical man. He cares about character, not bank accounts. Even when it comes to his daughter, The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Beatrice felt her cheeks warm, but she did not look away, especially when it comes to his daughter. Frank was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "All right. If the invitation stands, I'd be honored to come to dinner. Next Sunday, 6 o'clock, I'll be there." They sat there for another moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Then Frank reached out and touched her bandaged hand gently, carefully. "Take care of these. Change the dressing every day and keep them clean." "I will." "And no more riding out alone to look for water in dangerous country." "I make no promises." He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I didn't think you would." She turned her horse toward home, then looked back over her shoulder. "Frank?" "Yes." "I'm glad you were the one who found me." "So am I, Beatrice, so am I." She rode the rest of the way home alone, her mind full of storm-gray eyes and gentle hands and a voice that had called her back from the edge of panic. By the time she reached the ranch house, she had made a decision. Whatever happened next, she was not going to let Frank Iverson disappear from her life. The ranch house was still empty when she arrived, her father not yet returned from Phoenix. She tended to her horse, cleaned herself up, and changed into fresh clothes. The cuts on her hands would be harder to explain, but she could claim she had caught them on barbed wire while checking fences. It was plausible enough. She spent the next 2 days in a state of restless anticipation, jumping every time she heard hoofbeats, hoping each one would be Frank arriving early for dinner. But Sunday came without any sign of him, and she began to worry that he had changed his mind. Her father returned Saturday evening, tired and frustrated from his meetings. The Cattlemen's Association had no solutions for the drought, no magic answers that would save their herds. He looked older than his 58 years, worn down by worry and loss. "Did anything happen while I was gone?" he asked over supper that night. Beatrice thought about lying but found she could not. "I went looking for the Navarro Spring. My horse spooked and I took a fall. Nothing serious, but I met someone who helped me." Her father's eyes sharpened with concern. "How bad was the fall? Are you hurt?" "Just some scrapes. I'm fine, truly." She took a breath. "I invited him to dinner tomorrow night. I wanted you to meet him properly and thank him for his help." "Him?" Her father's expression grew wary. "Who is this man?" "His name is Frank Iverson. He has a small ranch west of town." Recognition dawned on her father's face. "I know the Iverson place. He's been running it alone for about 2 years now. Works hard from what I hear, keeps to himself mostly. Young fellow, around 25, I think." Her father studied her face with the intensity of a man who knew his daughter well. "And you want him to come to dinner?" "I do. He saved my life, father. The least we can do is share a meal with him." "The least we can do," her father repeated slowly. "Or the most you want to do?" Beatrice felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. "I like him. I won't pretend otherwise, but I also want you to meet him and form your own opinion. You've always trusted me to have good judgment about people." Her father sighed and rubbed his weathered face. "You're right. I do trust your judgment. If you say he's worth meeting, then I'll meet him. But Beatrice, be careful. You're a young woman with prospects, even in hard times. Don't let gratitude be confused with something else. It's not just gratitude." "Then what is it?" She thought about how to explain the connection she had felt with Frank, the sense of recognition, like meeting someone she had always been meant to know. "I don't know yet, but I'd like the chance to find out." Sunday evening arrived clear and cool, the November air crisp with the promise of winter. Beatrice spent the afternoon helping their cook prepare dinner, checking everything twice to make sure it was perfect. She changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and she took extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was elegant but not overly fussy. Her father watched these preparations with a mixture of amusement and concern, but he said nothing. He had put on his good suit and his best boots, and Beatrice knew he was trying to make a good impression too, in his own way. Frank arrived exactly at 6 o'clock, riding up to the house on his bay gelding. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing clothes that were clean and pressed, his hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. He carried a bottle of whiskey in one hand, good whiskey from the look of the label, probably more than he could easily afford. Beatrice met him at the door, her heart doing foolish things in her chest at the sight of him. "You came. I said I would." He handed her the whiskey. "For your father. I didn't want to arrive empty-handed. He'll appreciate that. Come in." She led him into the parlor where her father waited, and the two men sized each other up with the careful assessment of people who understood what was at stake. Her father extended his hand and Frank shook it firmly. "William Dalton, my daughter tells me I owe you a debt of gratitude for saving her life." "Frank Iverson, sir. I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time. Still, we're grateful. Please sit down." They settled into chairs and Beatrice poured whiskey for the men, water for herself. For a few minutes the conversation was stiff and formal, the kind of polite small talk that people made when they were feeling each other out. But gradually, as the whiskey loosened tongues and Frank proved himself to be intelligent and well-spoken, the atmosphere warmed. Her father asked about Frank's ranch, and Frank answered honestly about the challenges he faced and the strategies he was using to survive the drought. He did not exaggerate his success or hide his struggles, and Beatrice could see her father's respect growing with each honest answer. "You're doing better than most men with 10 times your resources," her father observed. "That takes skill and determination." "It takes stubbornness and a refusal to quit," Frank corrected with a slight smile. "I'm not sure that's the same as skill. In my experience, it's more valuable. Skill can be learned. Stubbornness is something you're born with." Dinner was announced and they moved to the dining room. The meal was excellent, roast beef and potatoes and fresh bread, and Frank ate with obvious appreciation. The conversation flowed more easily now, touching on politics and weather and the state of the territory. Frank held his own in discussions of everything from water rights to the prospects for Arizona statehood, and Beatrice found herself falling for him a little more with each thoughtful comment. After dinner, they retired to the porch where the night air was cool and filled with the sound of crickets. Her father excused himself after a while, claiming fatigue, but Beatrice suspected he was giving them time alone. She and Frank sat in the porch swing, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "Your father is a good man," Frank said quietly. "He is, and I think he likes you. I hope so. His opinion matters." "Why?" Frank turned to look at her, and even in the dim light from the windows she could see the intensity in his eyes. "Because I want to see you again, Beatrice. Not just as a friend. I want to court you properly if you'll let me and if he'll allow it." Her breath caught. She had hoped for this, had dreamed of it in the days since they met, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I want that too," she said softly. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that day in the canyon." "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you either. You're brave and smart and beautiful, and being around you makes me want to be better than I am. You're already pretty wonderful as far as I can tell." He reached out and took her bandaged hand gently, his thumb brushing over the cotton wrapping. "I keep thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't found you. It terrifies me. But you did find me. Maybe that means something. Maybe it does." They sat like that for a long time, holding hands and talking in quiet voices about their lives and their dreams and their fears. Frank told her about growing up poor in Missouri, about watching his mother work herself to exhaustion, about the promise he had made to himself that he would build something that could not be taken away. Beatrice told him about losing her brothers, about the weight of being the only child left to carry on her father's legacy, about the fear that she would not be strong enough or smart enough to save what they had built. "You're both of those things," Frank said firmly. "Strong and smart. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you can see that. Then why do I feel like I'm failing? Because you're fighting a drought and you can't punch the sky until it rains. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're up against something bigger than any one person can control." The simple truth of his words eased something in her chest that had been tight for months. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that would have been scandalous if anyone had seen, but she did not care. Being close to him felt natural, felt right. "Will you come back?" she asked. "Every Sunday, if you'll have me. And maybe some weekdays too, if I can spare the time from the ranch." "I'd like that." He left shortly after, but not before asking her father's formal permission to court Beatrice. Her father, who had clearly been waiting for this question, gave his blessing with the warning that Frank had better treat his daughter well or answer to him. Frank had promised he would, with a seriousness that left no doubt he meant every word. Over the following weeks, Frank became a regular presence at the Double D Ranch. He came for Sunday dinners, and sometimes appeared during the week with some excuse to be in the area, though they both knew the real reason. They went for rides together, always properly chaperoned or staying within sight of the ranch buildings. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. And slowly, carefully, they fell deeper in love. Frank was unlike any man Beatrice had ever known. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, and never once suggested she should leave the ranch business to the men. When she had ideas about water conservation or herd management, he listened seriously and often offered suggestions that showed he had been thinking about her problems as if they were his own. In return, Beatrice learned about Frank's world, the challenges of running a small operation with limited resources. She admired his resourcefulness, the way he could fix almost anything with wire and determination. She loved watching him work with his horses, the patience and gentleness he showed to animals that had been mistreated by previous owners. Christmas came and went, marked by a simple exchange of gifts. Frank gave her a leather journal with her initials tooled into the cover, a place to write down her ideas for the ranch. She gave him a new pair of work gloves lined with wool, practical and warm for the winter months ahead. They were not extravagant gifts, but they were thoughtful, chosen with care and given with love. On New Year's Eve, as 1883 became 1884, Frank kissed her for the first time. They were standing on the porch of the ranch house, watching the stars, when he cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle and sweet and filled with promise, and when they pulled apart, Beatrice felt like her entire world had shifted on its axis. "I love you," Frank said, the words simple and true. "I think I've loved you since the moment I saw you on that ledge, refusing to give up." "I love you too," she whispered back. "I didn't know it was possible to feel this way about someone. Will you marry me, Beatrice?" The question came out of nowhere, or maybe it had been coming since that first day and they had both known it. Either way, her answer was immediate and certain. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Beatrice felt joy bubble up inside her like a spring finally breaking through rock. They would have challenges ahead, she knew that. The drought was not over, the ranch was still struggling, and combining their lives would not be easy. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. They told her father the next morning, and if William Dalton had any reservations about his daughter marrying a man with more determination than money, he kept them to himself. He shook Frank's hand and welcomed him to the family, and Beatrice saw tears in her father's eyes when he hugged her. "Your mother would have loved him," he said quietly. "She always said you'd need someone who could match your fire." They planned a simple wedding for March, giving them time to prepare but not so long that they had to wait forever. Beatrice threw herself into the preparations with the same energy she brought to everything else, sewing her own dress and planning a celebration that would be modest but meaningful. Frank proposed combining their operations after the wedding, running the herds together and sharing resources. Her father agreed, seeing the wisdom in consolidating their strength. The Iverson place would become a line camp, and Frank would move to the Double D, bringing his horses and his 100 head of cattle to join their operation. In February, a miracle happened. It rained. Not just a sprinkle or a passing shower, but a real storm that lasted 3 days and soaked the parched earth until water ran in the dry creek beds and pooled in the low places. The land seemed to sigh with relief, and green shoots began appearing within days. It was not enough to end the drought completely, but it was a sign that the worst might be over. "Maybe it's a good omen," Beatrice said to Frank as they stood watching the rain from the shelter of the barn. "For us, for the ranch, for everything." "I don't know much about omens," Frank replied, pulling her close. "But I know that having you in my life feels like the best kind of luck." The wedding took place on a bright March morning, with the desert in bloom from the February rains. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in shades of yellow and purple, and the air smelled of wet earth and new growth. They were married in the small church in Gila Bend, with half the town in attendance despite the modest invitation list. Beatrice wore a dress of cream-colored silk that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her frame. Frank wore a new suit purchased special for the occasion, and he looked so handsome that Beatrice felt her throat tighten with emotion when she saw him waiting at the altar. Her father walked her down the aisle, his grip on her arm firm and steady. When he placed her hand in Frank's, he whispered, "Be happy, sweetheart. That's all I've ever wanted for you." The ceremony was simple and beautiful, the vows exchanged with voices that shook with feeling. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Frank kissed her, Beatrice felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was what she had been waiting for without knowing it, this partnership, this love, this man who saw her for who she truly was and loved her all the more for it. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and food enough for everyone. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Beatrice floated through it all in a haze of joy. She danced with her father, with Frank, with neighbors and friends who had come to celebrate with them. And when the sun began to set and the guests finally departed, she and Frank rode out to his place, their place now, for their wedding night. The little ranch house was simple but clean, and Frank had spent the past week making it as nice as he could. There were fresh flowers in a jar on the table and new linens on the bed, small touches that showed his care. They were both nervous, fumbling a bit with buttons and laces, but the awkwardness faded as soon as Frank kissed her, his hands gentle on her skin. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate by turns, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterward, lying in Frank's arms with her head on his chest, Beatrice felt a peace she had never known. This was home, she realized. Not a place but a person, this man who had appeared on the rim of a canyon and changed her life forever. "What are you thinking?" Frank asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm happy, that I love you, that I can't believe this is real. It's real." He tipped her face up to kiss her softly. "And it's forever, I promise you that." They spent a week at the line camp, a honeymoon away from the demands of the ranch. They talked and made love and rode out to explore the land together, making plans for the future. Frank showed her his favorite places, the hidden springs and the high meadows where his horses grazed. Beatrice shared her dreams for expanding the operation, for building something that would last beyond their lifetimes. When they returned to the Double D, they threw themselves into the work with renewed energy. The March rains had continued sporadically, and the range was greener than it had been in 3 years. The cattle were fattening up, and there was talk of good prices at market. Things were not easy, but they were better, and having Frank as a true partner made all the difference. He brought innovations from his smaller operation, techniques for water conservation and rotational grazing that made their resources stretch further. Beatrice contributed her knowledge of the land and the markets, and together they made decisions that strengthened the ranch in ways neither could have achieved alone. Her father watched all this with satisfaction, seeing his legacy in good hands. He began taking more time for himself, trusting Beatrice and Frank to handle the day-to-day operations. For the first time in years, he looked relaxed, unburdened. Summer came hot and bright, but the winter and spring rains had left the land with enough moisture to withstand the heat. The cattle drive to market in September brought the best prices in 5 years, and they returned with enough money to pay off debts and even make some improvements to the ranch. They bought new breeding stock, repaired fences and buildings, and even hired 2 additional hands to help with the increased workload. Through it all, Beatrice and Frank grew closer. They learned each other's rhythms, how to work together and when to give each other space. They had disagreements sometimes, both being stubborn people, but they learned to talk through their differences rather than letting resentment build. And every night, no matter how tired they were or how hard the day had been, they fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful for what they had found. In November, on the anniversary of the day they met, Frank took Beatrice riding out to the canyon where he had found her. They stood at the rim looking down at the ledge that had nearly been her grave, and he pulled her close. "1 year ago, I was just a lonely cowboy riding through these hills thinking about water and cattle and making it through another season," he said. "I had no idea that finding you would change everything. Do you ever regret it? Taking on a wife and a struggling ranch and all the complications that came with me?" He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "Not for one single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice. You and this life we're building together. I wake up every morning grateful that your horse spooked when it did," she laughed, remembering her terror on that ledge. "I can't say I was grateful at the time, but are you grateful now? More than I can say." She stood on her toes to kiss him. "I love you, Frank Iverson. Thank you for being stubborn enough to pull me off that ledge and smart enough to keep me. I think you've got that backwards. You're the one who kept me." They rode home as the sun set, painting the sky in the same oranges and purples as that first evening. And as they approached the ranch house, Beatrice felt the same sense of coming home that she had felt in Frank's arms on their wedding night. This was where she belonged, with this man, building this life. In December, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before saying anything to Frank. When she finally told him over breakfast one morning, his face went through a series of expressions so quickly she almost laughed. Surprise, joy, fear, wonder, and finally settling on a grin so wide it looked like it might split his face. "A baby," he said, as if he could not quite believe it. "A baby. Due sometime in late June or early July, I think." He stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair, then pulled her into his arms and held her like she was made of glass. "Are you all right, Do you feel well? Should you be sitting down? Frank, I'm pregnant, not dying. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. But you're my woman, carrying my baby, and I want to make sure everything is perfect. His concern was endearing even if it was a bit excessive. Over the next months, Frank fussed over her constantly, trying to take on all the heavy work and insisting she rest more than she wanted to. Beatrice tolerated it because she knew it came from love, but she also made it clear that she was not going to spend 9 months sitting in a rocking chair. She had a ranch to help run. Her father was delighted by the news, his joy at becoming a grandfather obvious in everything he did. He began working on a cradle in the evenings, carving it from oak with painstaking care. Watching him bent over the wood, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, Beatrice felt a wave of love for this man who had lost so much and still found room in his heart for joy. Spring brought more rain, and the land bloomed again. It seemed the drought had truly broken, though everyone remained cautious, remembering how quickly things could change in the desert. But the cattle were thriving, the horses were healthy, and the ranch was more prosperous than it had been in half a decade. As Beatrice's pregnancy progressed, she had to admit that Frank's protectiveness was sometimes justified. The heat was more oppressive than usual, and her changing body made the simple tasks of ranch life more challenging. But she persevered, working as long as she could each day and resting when she needed to. On a blazing July afternoon, with the temperature over 100 degrees and no clouds in sight, Beatrice went into labor. Frank, who had been checking fences when her water broke, rode back to the house faster than was probably safe and nearly killed the horse in his panic. The doctor was summoned from town, and Beatrice's labor proceeded through the evening and into the night. Frank paced the hallway outside their bedroom, wearing a path in the wooden floor. Her father sat with him, offering calm reassurance and stories of Beatrice's own birth, how her mother had been just as strong and stubborn as their daughter. The screams from the bedroom were torture to Frank, each one making him want to break down the door and somehow fix this, but of course there was nothing he could do except wait. Just after midnight, a new sound joined the cacophony, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. Frank stopped pacing, his heart in his throat, and a moment later the doctor emerged with a tired smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Iverson. You have a healthy baby girl." Frank barely heard the rest, pushing past the doctor to get to Beatrice. She was propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with joy, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a white blanket. When she looked up and saw him, her smile could have lit the whole territory. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Frank approached slowly, almost afraid, and then he was sitting on the edge of the bed and Beatrice was placing the baby in his arms. She was so small, so perfect, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that seemed to already be taking in the world around her. He felt something crack open in his chest, a well of love so deep and fierce it almost frightened him. "She's beautiful," he whispered, unable to take his eyes off his daughter. "She's perfect." "She looks like you," Beatrice said, reaching up to touch his face. "She has your eyes. She has your stubborn chin." He looked up at his wife, this woman who had just endured hours of pain to bring their child into the world. "Thank you, for her, for us, for everything." Tears were streaming down his face and he did not care. Let them fall. This was a moment worth crying over, worth celebrating, worth remembering for the rest of his life. They named her Margaret Ellen, after both their mothers, but from the first day she was Maggie to everyone who knew her. She was a good baby, healthy and strong, with lungs that could make themselves heard across 3 counties when she wanted feeding. Frank was hopelessly devoted to her, jumping at her every cry and spending hours just watching her sleep. William Dalton was equally smitten with his granddaughter, holding her with the careful reverence of a man who had thought he might never get this chance. He finished the cradle and presented it with pride, and Maggie slept in it every night, rocked by her father or her mother or her grandfather, surrounded by love. As Maggie grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. The rains stayed regular, the cattle multiplied, and they were able to expand their operation. They bought adjacent land when it became available, adding to their range. They built a new barn and renovated the main house, adding rooms for their growing family. Because Maggie was not their only child, 3 years after she was born, Beatrice delivered a son they named Thomas William, honoring both her lost brother and her father. Tommy was different from his sister, quieter and more serious even as a baby, but just as loved. Frank now had 2 children to dote on, and he embraced fatherhood with the same determination he brought to everything else. The years passed in the way they do when life is full and good. Maggie learned to ride almost before she could walk, showing the same fearlessness her mother had possessed at her age. Tommy was more cautious but just as capable, preferring books and numbers to cattle and horses. Frank and Beatrice raised them to be strong and independent, teaching them the value of hard work and the importance of taking care of what was theirs. William Dalton lived to see both his grandchildren grow into young people he was proud of. He passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Beatrice holding his hand and Frank, and the children gathered around his bed. His last words were that he was grateful, that he had gotten to see his daughter happy and his legacy secured. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved. His death was hard on all of them, but especially on Beatrice. She had lost so many people she loved, and even though her father had lived a good long life, it still hurt. Frank held her through her grief, just as she had held him through his own losses, and slowly the sharp pain dulled to an ache that was bearable. They kept the ranch running, honoring William's memory by taking care of what he had built. Maggie showed an aptitude for ranching that delighted her parents, while Tommy proved to have a head for business that served them well in negotiations and planning. Together, the family made the Double D one of the most successful operations in southern Arizona. Frank and Beatrice grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still rode out to the canyon sometimes, standing at the rim and remembering the day that had changed everything. The ledge where Beatrice had been trapped had eroded away over the years, but the memory remained sharp and clear. "I still can't believe you stopped calling for help when you saw my horse," Frank said once, shaking his head. "What if I hadn't been able to reach you? But you did reach me. You've been reaching me ever since." They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends, a far cry from the simple ceremony in the Gila Bend church. Maggie was 24 now, married to a good man and expecting her first child. Tommy was 21, working the ranch with his father and showing every sign of being able to take over when the time came. Standing on the porch of the ranch house, watching their family and friends celebrate, Beatrice leaned into Frank's side and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking?" Frank asked, the same question he had asked her hundreds of times over the years. "That I'm grateful. For all of it. For you finding me that day, for the life we've built, for our children and the future they're going to have. For every moment we've had together." Frank kissed her temple, a gesture that was as familiar now as breathing. "I'm grateful, too, for stubborn women who refuse to give up even when they're trapped on canyon ledges, for second chances and new beginnings. For you, always for you." They stood like that as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in the same colors it had been that first evening. 26 years had passed, since Frank Iverson had appeared on the rim of a canyon and pulled Beatrice Dalton back from the edge. 26 years of love and struggle and triumph and heartbreak and joy. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, lean years, losses that hurt and challenges that seemed insurmountable. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. Frank's hand found Beatrice's, their fingers intertwining with the easy comfort of long practice. Two people who had started as strangers and become everything to each other. In the house behind them, they could hear Maggie laughing at something her husband said, and Tommy arguing good-naturedly with one of the ranch hands about the best way to break a horse. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived. Should we go back inside? Beatrice asked, though she made no move to leave. In a minute. I'm not quite ready to share you yet. She smiled and settled more comfortably against him. They had earned these quiet moments, these stolen instances of peace. The ranch would still be there when they went back inside. Their family would still need them. The work would continue tomorrow and the day after that and all the days beyond. But right now, in this moment, it was just the two of them and the desert sunset and the memory of a day 26 years ago when everything had changed. When a cowboy's horse had appeared on the rim of a canyon, and a woman trapped below had stopped calling for help because she knew, somehow, that she was already saved. Years continued to unfold like the pages of a beloved book, each one adding depth and texture to the story Frank and Beatrice were writing together. Maggie gave them 3 grandchildren, spirited kids who loved spending time at the ranch, climbing trees and learning to rope fence posts under their grandfather's patient instruction. Tommy eventually married a schoolteacher from Phoenix, a smart woman named Sarah who brought books and culture to the ranch without ever looking down on the practical work that sustained them all. The ranch prospered through good years and survived the bad ones. Frank and Beatrice made it through droughts and floods, through economic downturns and cattle diseases, through everything the unforgiving Arizona land could throw at them. They made it through because they had each other, because they had built something strong enough to weather any storm. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a huge celebration. Half of Gila Bend showed up, along with ranchers and friends from across the territory. There was a band and dancing, mountains of food and speeches that made both Frank and Beatrice tear up with emotion. When Tommy stood to toast his parents, his voice was thick with feeling. My father once told me that the luckiest day of his life was when he heard a woman screaming in a canyon and decided to investigate instead of riding on. My mother told me she thought she was going to die that day, but then she saw a horse appear on the rim above her, and she knew she would be all right. 40 years later, they're still saving each other every single day. Here's to Frank and Beatrice Iverson, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for. The crowd cheered and glasses were raised, and Frank pulled Beatrice into his arms for a dance, even though his knees protested, and her back was not what it used to be. They swayed together to the music, surrounded by everyone they loved, and Beatrice thought that if she died tomorrow she would die happy, knowing she had lived a life beyond her wildest dreams. But she did not die tomorrow, or the day after that, or for many more years to come. She and Frank grew old together with grace and dignity, silver threads replacing the dark in their hair, lines deepening around their eyes from years of squinting into the desert sun and smiling at each other. They slowed down eventually, handing more and more of the ranch work to Tommy and his capable hands, but they never fully retired. This land was in their blood. This life was who they were. They spent their final years in the comfort of routine and love. Morning coffee on the porch watching the sun come up. Afternoon rides when their bodies allowed it, moving slowly across land they knew like the backs of their hands. Evening meals with family gathered around the big table, 3 generations sharing food and stories and laughter. And every night, falling asleep in the same bed they had shared for over 5 decades, still reaching for each other in the darkness. Frank passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87. He had spent the previous day working with one of his great-grandsons in the barn, teaching the boy how to repair a saddle. He had eaten dinner with Beatrice, just the two of them for a change, and they had talked about the old days, about the canyon and the ledge, and how one moment of chance had led to a lifetime of love. He had kissed her goodnight and told her he loved her, just as he had every night for 58 years. And then he had simply not woken up. Beatrice grieved him deeply, but not desperately. They had been given so much time, so many years of happiness, that she could not be angry about losing him. She missed him terribly, missed his laugh and his steady presence, and the way he still made her heart flutter even after all those years. But she also felt grateful, so profoundly grateful for every moment they had shared. She lived another 3 years without him, surrounded by family and love, still sharp-minded and capable even as her body failed. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren, teaching them about the ranch and the land and the importance of holding on to what mattered. And on a warm July evening, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, she closed her eyes and did not open them again. They buried her next to Frank on the hill beside her father, 3 generations of Daltons resting together, overlooking the land they had loved and protected. The whole county came to the funeral, mourning the loss of a woman who had been a pillar of their community for over 6 decades. Tommy gave the eulogy, his voice steady despite his tears. He told the story of how his parents had met, how his father had appeared at the rim of a canyon when his mother needed him most. He talked about the life they had built together, the legacy they were leaving behind, the love that had sustained them through everything. And he ended with a promise that the ranch would continue, that the Iverson name would endure, that what Frank and Beatrice had created would live on through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The Double D Ranch did continue, thriving under Tommy's management and eventually passing to his children and then to theirs. The Iverson family grew and prospered, each generation adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation Frank and Beatrice had laid. The canyon where they had first met became something of a family shrine, a place where Iversons went to think and remember and feel connected to their history. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and purple, you could almost hear them if you listened closely enough. Frank's steady voice and Beatrice's laugh, the sound of horses on rock and the echo of a love that had started with a rescue and grown into something eternal. A love that had survived droughts and losses and all the challenges the Wild West could offer. A love that had begun the moment she stopped calling for help and saw his horse appear on the rim of the canyon right above, and lasted until the end of their days and beyond. The story of Frank and Beatrice Iverson became legend in Gila Bend, passed down through generations as proof that love could bloom in the harshest circumstances, that strangers could become soulmates, that sometimes the worst day of your life could turn out to be the beginning of something beautiful. Children grew up hearing about the cowboy who saved the rancher's daughter from a canyon ledge, about the wedding that brought 2 struggling ranches together, about the partnership that became one of the most successful operations in southern Arizona. But more than the business success or the land or the legacy, what people remembered was the love. The way Frank and Beatrice had looked at each other even after 50 years of marriage, like they were still discovering each other anew. The way they had held hands while walking, finished each other's sentences, worked together like two parts of the same whole. The way they had built not just a ranch but a life, not just a family but a dynasty rooted in love and respect and unwavering partnership. That was the real legacy they left behind. Not the cattle or the land or the money, though those things mattered, but the example of what love could be when it was built on friendship and trust and mutual respect. When two people decided to face life as partners, sharing the burdens and the joys equally. When they chose each other every single day, even when times were hard and the world seemed against them. And so the story endured, told and retold, each version adding new details but always ending the same way, with two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last forever. With a cowboy and a rancher's daughter who had started on a canyon ledge and ended up creating a legacy that would echo through the generations. In the end, perhaps that is all anyone can hope for. To find someone who sees you, truly sees you, and loves what they find. To build something meaningful together. To leave the world better than you found it. Frank and Beatrice Iverson did all of that and more, and their story lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The sun continued to set over the Arizona desert, day after day, year after year, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The canyon where it all began still stood, weathered by wind and rain but eternal in its own way. And somewhere in the whisper of the desert wind, in the rustling of the sage and the call of the hawks, the echo of their love remained, as constant and unchanging as the land itself. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending but something real and earned and true. A love story written in dust and determination, in hard work and harder times, in laughter and tears, and every moment in between. A story that proved love could conquer anything, even a 20-foot drop into a canyon, even a devastating drought, even the simple fact that two people started as strangers and had every reason to stay that way. But they had not stayed strangers. Frank had stopped when he saw those tracks, had looked over the edge when he could have ridden on, had thrown down his rope and pulled Beatrice to safety. And she had stopped screaming when she saw his horse appear on the rim above, had trusted this stranger to save her, had opened her heart to the possibility that he might be something more. That moment of trust, that leap of faith, had led to everything else. To love and marriage and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. To a ranch that flourished and a legacy that endured. To 58 years of partnership and devotion and the kind of love that most people only dream about. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the money or the land or even the legacy, precious as those things were. What mattered was that they had loved each other, truly and deeply and without reservation. They had been there for each other through everything life threw at them. They had built a life together that was worth living, worth fighting for, worth remembering. Their story ended the way all stories eventually must, with death and burial and the passage of time. But it also never ended, because the love they had created lived on in their descendants, in the ranch they had built, in the example they had set. It lived on in every Iverson who held their partner's hand and promised forever, in every couple who chose love over fear, partnership over independence, together over alone. The desert wind blew across the Double D Ranch as it had for generations, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of rain. The sun set over the canyon where it all began, painting the sky in familiar colors. And somewhere in the fabric of that timeless landscape, the love of Frank and Beatrice Iverson remained, eternal and unbreakable, a testament to the power of one moment, one choice, one heart opening to another. She had stopped calling for help when the cowboy's horse appeared on the rim of the canyon right above. And in that moment of silence, in that instant of recognition and hope, a love story began that would last forever.